Hey, welcome to Spanish Exponential. This video will talk about and explain the Spanish verb tener, very super important basic verb to have, and you must understand this irregular verb, which is a little bit complicated that people might think, but it is actually not, and I'm going to tell you why. And just to be clear, by the end of this video, you will understand one of the most important basic verb tener, to have, but not only that, you will have a complete grasp of full verb conjugation concept. And I want you to think this as a roadmap. And the reason is the verb conjugation is like mathematics. It takes time for people to really digest what you learn and fully understand. But you cannot be frustrated. And that's not your fault because it's human psychology to be frustrated, and that will actually stop you to move forward. And that's something that you cannot make it happen. So instead, you must understand this is the roadmap, golden roadmap that takes you to where you want to be. And the best news is that we as a human being, we have an amazing part of our brain to process this roadmap and information in the back of our head. Automatically, subconsciously, it will be processing the information for us without us consciously thinking about it. And a lot of teachers in an institute make a mistake not presenting all this information to their students because they don't want you to be upset. But it is costing your learning speed. It is costing the opportunity for your brain to start processing the information early on so that you will get it as soon as possible. We're going to talk about this later on as well. So what is irregular verb? Irregular verb is a verb whose conjugation follows a different patterns than typical one. We're going to talk about the verb tener. Tener is the infinitive form of a verb meaning to have. So for example, will be, I have money, I have. Or do you have a class today? Do you have? And tener is one of ER verbs with irregular conjugating patterns. So for example, in present tense, it conjugates as tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. So it lacks typical pattern of conjugation for ER verbs. So for the regular conjugating verb, watch the other video so we can move on. So in the present tense, the verb only have 6 formation of conjugation. And if you want to focus on the Spanish language in Latin America, then you only have 5. Because in most of the countries in Latin America, they don't use vosotros, second person plural. So usually with the regularly conjugating verb, we can just take the head part of ten and add the regular pattern of ending words, o, es, e, hemos, es, and en. But for this irregular conjugating verb, tener, the head part of ten will change its form. Depends on who is the person we're talking about. So let's break it down. So the black letter is the head part of tener, and the red letter is the ending part of the conjugation. And orange is where, depends on who the person is, it changes the form of the head part of the verb. So it goes, yo tengo, tú tienes, él, ella, usted tiene, nosotros tenemos, vosotros tenéis, ellos, ellas, ustedes tienen. So how do you memorize it? How do you remember them? Believe it or not, reciting them is the easiest and most effective way to memorize them. Meaning, use your vocal to recite them and listen them using your ears back to your head. The reason is our brain and psychology is fine-tuned into the sound, your vocalized sound, and the sound that you hear in the surrounding. The history of writing and reading is relatively shallow compared to, how we are fine-tuned into the sound. So let's take a look at from this angle. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. So let's take a look at some of common example on phrases that use verb tener. These three are tener frío, tener hambre, tener que irse. So for example, tengo frío. The literal translation will be I have cold. But it really means I feel cold. So the different language express differently for the same thing, and then you must understand in order to fully appreciate it and understand the culture, different culture. So on that note, the similar thing is if you want to say it's cold, whether it's cold, then they will say hace frío. Hacer means to make or to do. It's not interesting. So tiene hambre means he or she is hungry. And tienes que irte means you have to go. We're going to take a look at, other phrases and more details about phrases in other video. So let's continue. So actually, irregularity of the verb tener is not irregular. For example, here are 4 other verbs that have tener in its word. Obtener, meaning to obtain. Mantener, meaning to maintain. Sostener, meaning to hold. Detener, meaning to stop. And they conjugate exact the same way that the verb tener conjugate. If the subject is first person singular, I, then it's going to go obtengo, mantengo, sostengo, detengo. So if you recite the 6 sets of present tense conjugation for the verb tener, tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen, 50 times, trust me, it will stick to your head. And that can be easily applied to these 4 and more verbs. But actually, the real power is not in the memorization. Even if you don't memorize, if you are familiar with the conjugation, then you are golden. As an adult foreign language learner, the awareness of the new structure, new idea, new concept, new rules is important, not memorizing everything. Let's continue with past tense. You want to know how to say to have in the past tense, right? So in this past tense of tener, the first part of the word ten completely changed to tub. It's not tub, it's tube. So it goes like tuve, tuviste, tuvo, tuvimos, tuvisteis, tuvieron. So when we break down into color code, as we can see, ten becomes tube, and the rest are the same. Yo tuve, tú tuviste, él, ella, usted tuvo, nosotros tuvimos, vosotros tuvisteis, ellos, ellas, ustedes tuvieron. Let's take a look at it from another angle. Tuve, tuviste, tuvo, tuvimos, tuvisteis, tuvieron. So here is a chart that we can compare how they conjugate the verb tener for present tense and predicate tense. Again, the most important thing is being aware of those conjugations, because that way we can identify the verb when we hear or when we see it or when we read it. So we want to be familiar with them. So again, tener, verb tener's irregularity, conjugation irregularity is not irregular. So for obtener, for the first person singular, we could just conjugate like tener, tuve, so it's obtuve. For the mantener also, for the first person singular, we could just conjugate it the same way, so it will be mantuve. For sostener, we could conjugate to sostuve. And for detener, we could also conjugate as detuve for the first person singular. Now, before we move forward, I wanted to make sure that you understand this concept, because this is like two ways. In one way, you could completely fail. And the other way, you actually could make sure your success inevitable. I wanted to make sure of this at this point because we're going to move forward and cover entire conjugation for tener. And that actually is a lot, especially compared to how small number that English conjugate and Japanese conjugate. But it's also, this is the beauty of the language as well. So this is the roadmap for you. It is not expected to be understood completely from the beginning. As a matter of fact, it is okay not to understand any of it in the beginning. It is better to have an entire visual map rather than encountering obstacles as you go, as you move forward. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it is to activate the amazing part of your brain. It will be complete waste of time if we don't activate it today, because we need time for our brain to process the information. So in other words, sooner the activation date is, the sooner the achievement will be. Sooner your dream come true. Now, we adult as a human being has the exact same ability to learn a new language, just like a children. The only difference will be ability to capture the awareness, meaning we are easily get blinded by idea, concept, and expectation that is already programmed into our mind. So unlike children, we need to be supplemented by logical explanation of certain new rules and regulations and the foundations. So the blinded logical part of our brain can be aware of the new thing, like children easily catch. Once we have that supplement, our brain also can connect the dots while we are asleep. We just need to activate our amazing part of our brain. Now, in order to make that happen, we need to stay positive. We need to have strong belief to activate amazing part of our brain. So we need to be super aware of our psychology and the negative feeling arise all the time. I'm going to cover this topic in another video in depth. Let's continue with the imperfect tense. The imperfect tense is a verb form that expresses an action in the point of past in which the action has not completed at the time. So for the verb tener, even though it's irregular verb, the imperfect tense, it will conjugate regularly. So tenía, tenías, tenía. teníamos, teníais, tenían. When we look at this chart, you're not going to see the orange because it conjugates regularly. Yo tenía. Tú tenías. Él, ella. Usted tenía. Nosotros teníamos. Vosotros teníais. Ellos, ellas, ustedes tenían. Let's take a look at from a different angle. Tenía yo. Tenías tú. Tenía usted. Teníamos nosotros. Teníais vosotros. Tenían ustedes. Here is a comparison of predicate tense and imperfect tense for the verb tener. Notice that predicate tense changed the head part of the verb completely to te, u, be, tube, and imperfect tense maintained regular pattern of the conjugation. So here we can apply imperfect tense of the verb tener to the example that we looked at previously. Tenía frío. I was cold. Tenía hambre. He was hungry. Tenías que irte. You had to go. Now again, we can apply this conjugation pattern of the verb tener to other verbs that contains tener. For example, obtenía, mantenía, sostenía, detenía. Let's move to the next one.